Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. My name is Emma Galdo, and I'm the Training and Documentation Manager for iClicker. We have two presenters today. The first is Mike Shapiro. He is a clinical assistant professor and iClicker user. He's at the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at Georgia State. And we have Natalie Dougal. She is a faculty advocate and training specialist here at iClicker. What we will be doing today, I'm going to go over the agenda with you quickly. Professor Shapiro is going to explain his approach to iClicker attendance and share his experience using that in his class. And then Natalie will review the more technical side of attendance and some settings that will help you be successful if you're using it in your class. Finally, we'll talk about some creative uses of attendance. So at this time, I'm going to kick it over to Professor Shapiro. Thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to hear from you.
Thanks, Emma. I appreciate that. Thank you to Natalie for helping us with this. Greetings to everyone. It's 2 o'clock here on the East Coast. If you're on the left coast, good morning to you. I have been using the iClicker software for about 6 years now. I've been teaching. I'm in my 16th year teaching in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology, now at Georgia State University. About 5.5 or 6 years ago, I had a very, very large class, 200 students in it. Those classes now are even larger, 325. But like most of us, I had about 15, 20, maybe 25 students that were fully engaged, a similar number that were partially engaged, and about 150 bumps on a log. If I hadn't used a seating chart and learned names, those students probably would not have participated at all. And some of the active students came to me during class and said, why don't you consider using some sort of student response system that would get students fully engaged? About the same time, one of the iClicker staff was doing a presentation at my previous institution, and a friend who was still teaching there invited me, and I immediately adopted the iClicker devices. We were using iClicker 2s in those days. Later on, that same representative asked me to be on the beta team for iClicker Reef, what we now call iClicker Cloud. So I've been involved in beta testing since 0.7. We are currently using a released version of 4.6.1. I am beta testing 5.0.3, so I'm still involved 5 years later in beta testing. And I enjoy that because I get to see some of the new features that are coming out. For me, I have always taken attendance, and attendance and participation comprise 10% of the grade in all of my courses. At a previous institution, I could not just ascribe a score to attendance, so my faculty lead at that point suggested, well, include participation, and he was right, because the reality is students need to come to class. They need to be involved in what's going on, not just to learn to understand what the faculty is talking about, but to hear what their peers are talking about and to share their thoughts. I teach a number of classes, including one in ethical issues, and I try to make it not just about criminal justice. I try to make it about ethics as a life course. So students always have something to share. So I do take attendance every single day. What I found was early on, students would often forget to bring their iClicker device, or the batteries would have died. So I wanted to do something different. And when I was approached about a software platform that allowed students to use their smartphones or their tablets, I quickly embraced it. Phones are not forgotten. Phones are not shared. You don't have to worry about somebody coming in with other students' phones. Students are umbilically attached, just like my children are umbilically attached to their phones. And the last thing I want to very briefly at the beginning talk about is I found the iClicker developers to be extremely responsive. They hear what we say. They understand when we're having difficulties or when we see an opportunity for improvements, and they are extremely responsive. We have to be patient because they have to roll out upgrades. But as you can tell, in 5 years, there have been 5 large upgrades that they've worked on, and there will be more to come. So those are sort of my starting thoughts about why I started to use iClicker. In terms of the beauty of attendance, once you've set up your class, students will get a prompt about 15 minutes before class that class is about to begin. And it's always nice for them to have that reminder that class is going to be coming up. So I appreciate that. That was an addition that we had asked for. Instead of students having to sign in manually, or students having to swipe their ID cards in a device, which I tried. I had a large class. There were about 150 in it, and students were backed up in that. It was very cumbersome. With the iClicker software, everybody could sign in at once if you want to, and certainly they can sign in even before class begins. I do use paper rosters early on in the semester. Students are dropping and adding. Students may not have yet adopted the iClicker software. They may be waiting on financial aid, but those paper rosters ultimately are distracting. They get lost in larger classes. Students that arrive late have missed the paper roster. It's at the other end of the classroom. So having something that they can take ownership on is important. And it does place responsibility on students. They not only have to sign themselves in, they can then later on check and see their attendance. So using the iClicker software for that is great. By the way, if you're not going to use the iClicker software for polls, real live or real-time quizzes, using the iClicker software merely for attendance is free. So that makes it easier on some students. I personally maintain an extremely comprehensive Excel spreadsheet, one that I have developed over the years. So I plug attendance in, but I can grab that attendance in a CSV file from the iClicker attendance and drop it right into my file. I can also upload that to our LMS on campus, and we'll talk about that in a moment. If you have to make adjustments after class has taken place, very, very simple to do. You log into the iClicker website, you go in, you make an adjustment, and I always suggest that you make a comment on why you made an adjustment. At Georgia State and throughout the university system of Georgia, we allow for excused absences if the student is under court orders or military orders, or if it's a university-sponsored athletic or educational event. So oftentimes I'll make those notations why the student was excused. If they were absent in the notations, but it turns out they were present, you can simply mark that they were present and again say that there was some sort of issue that caused them to be marked absent. The software allows for you to describe a circle around your class. The radius can be as small as 100 feet or as wide as 500 feet. That's almost a quarter of a mile. So students that are within that range can mark themselves present and can participate, but you can describe that circle so that somebody that's at home or somebody that's across campus can't participate in the activities. And I encourage you to do that. I've set mine up to run automatically. I actually set it up to run 10 minutes before class begins. I'll talk about that in a moment. When I first started using the attendance feature, I had it start when class began, and I realized pretty quickly that students were distracted by doing attendance. And in fact, most students arrive in class early. So allowing them to mark their attendance before class begins is a good feature. I did mention LMS integration. The iClicker software works with many different forms of LMS. The University System of Georgia uses a variant of Desire to Learn, D2L, called iCollege, and it makes it very, very easy for me to transfer information to it. And then finally, I was at a conference this past week where somebody mentioned that more than 5,000 of the 8,000 colleges and universities in the United States receive some form of federal funding. If that's the case, we have to mark, be able to notate when a student stopped attending. So using the iClicker attendance feature allows me very simply to go back and see when it was that a student was not attending any longer. Okay. Some of the tips that I use, I absolutely run it automatically. It's a set and forget. You can run it manually, and if we have time, we'll show you how to run it manually. But at the very beginning of the semester, even before the semester begins, I will set up the class and I will set up the attendance feature to run. What I've learned is starting at a few minutes before class makes sense. Most of the students will actually sign in that lag time. So I actually set it up to run 10 minutes before class begins, and I found that most students like that. I use geolocation. I try to keep it as small as I can. The lowest feature, lowest setting is 100 feet. Sometimes that's a problem. In older buildings, we have many buildings in downtown Atlanta that have been converted from prior use to university use. It can be a little cumbersome, so you may have to adjust that feature. Do note that if a student is using a laptop or a desktop, that doesn't have location services. I had a student yesterday, literally yesterday, who was on her laptop and said she couldn't log into the class. She couldn't sign in for attendance purposes, but there on her desk, right next to her laptop, was her smartphone. And I said, Taylor, it's very simple. Pick up your smartphone. That has location services enabled. Mark yourself present. You can then use the laptop to answer the poll questions that we'll be using in class. So that's a pretty simple thing to do. So if they're using a tablet, if they're using a smartphone, make sure that they have location services enabled on that device. Again, set that start time before class. How far in advance, that's up to you. 5 minutes might be enough. For me, 10 minutes. We have 15 minutes between our classes at Georgia State, so students often will get to the classroom 10 or 15 minutes before class actually begins. When I first started using the software, I set attendance to run the entire class session. And what I learned pretty quickly was that didn't discourage latecomers. So what I do now is I set the attendance to end about 15 minutes into class. Students can still come into class, but they have a conversation with me afterwards about why they were not able to mark themselves present. And I think that's important. We have a responsibility to make sure the students are there on time. And then lastly, for those first couple of weeks of the semester, I'm a belt and suspender person. I absolutely will do both a paper roster and the electronic roster. I think that helps me to make sure I don't miss anybody. And sometimes students are late adopting it. Some real quick tips, okay? There is a threshold. There's a cell that tells you how many cumulative absences students have in the attendance software. I set mine to 4, but that's based upon teaching twice a week and 15-week semesters. If you're teaching once a week, if you're teaching in a mini-mester, you may want to adjust that, but set it to a comfortable number because you'll get a visual cue that a student has been absent a lot. Do expect to make some adjustments, especially early in the semester. Sometimes students are late adopting the software. They may not have the funds. Financial aid may not have come through. They may have the 14-day free trial, and then they think they can fake it for the rest of the semester. I chastised a student about that yesterday and said, no. I warned you in my syllabus. I warned you day one in class. You can get started for free, but after 14 days, you need to purchase the software, and the software is not expensive. It's $14.99 for 6 months. So students can skip going to Starbucks a couple of times, and that will pay for the software. And then again, just as a reminder, use that comment field when you're making adjustments. I teach 3 different classes every semester. I often will have several hundred students in those classes, and I can quickly forget why I made an adjustment. In my Excel spreadsheet, I don't make comments, but in the iClicker attendance feature, I absolutely do. Okay, some real quick last thoughts about it. One, when you're giving a poll is a real-time quiz, you can actually click on the attendance and you can see who's there. So if a student's having trouble, you can let them know whether they are properly in the class for those purposes. I just lost my screen here. Hang on.
I think you popped over to my, there we go.
I popped over to yours. Sorry about that, folks. Let's try this. There we go. The iClicker site, remember the branding issue is going to be changed soon. When it first came out, they called it Reef. I'm a sailor. I don't know about the rest of you. Reefs are things that sailors try to avoid. They're not very pleasant unless you're snorkeling or scuba diving on them. So the branding is going to change by the end of this year. It'll be called iClicker Cloud, but you'll still see the Reef label occasionally. Bookmark this site because you will be visiting it often. That's where you can look up attendance. That's where you can pull down poll scores. You can pull a whole bunch of things there, and it's a pretty handy thing for you to bookmark. And then be patient with students. Occasionally, they're going to have a dead battery. I had a student yesterday, as I started a poll, she had to run to the front of the class and pull her phone out of the wall. She had it charging. So, that'll happen. I've had students whose phones have been flushed down the toilet or they've dropped them and they don't have their phones for a few days. They may forget them. We do occasionally have Wi-Fi connectivity issues at Georgia State. So be patient with them. Recognize that they're trying and you should be trying too. And then the last thing I have to say is if you see a way that the program can be improved, if you see a feature that you'd like to have added, reach out to developers because they are listening and they're acting on it. You have to be patient. They're working on things so you don't get it immediately. But a lot of the features that I've asked for over the last several years are now in real time. They are available to me. So that's pretty much what I have for you. I'm happy to answer your questions at the end of the session, but I want to turn it over to Natalie because she's got some suggestions for you. And if there's time, she'll show you in real time how you can set up a class and set up attendance. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I like your point about the Wi-Fi especially. And something that I found with students is a lot of times there are certain students that you will have who, even though they're using a laptop or their phone or whatever, they will have never have joined the actual campus Wi-Fi because they're fully satisfied with whatever their mobile service is providing with them. So one of the things I really encourage people to do is if you go on your university website and you search for the phrase Wi-Fi, I can guarantee you that whoever is maintaining the Wi-Fi on that campus has put together a small page for students that says exactly how to join those Wi-Fi networks. And when a student's using a laptop, if you're using GPS, if the student is not joining your class campus Wi-Fi network, that's one of the reasons why the location on their computer might not show up. The other thing is, if your students are like most people, I don't know about you, but when I install a brand new app and I open it for the first time, it says, this device wants to know your location. I knee-jerk say, no. Or if I go on a website, this website wants to know your location. No, no one's allowed to see these things. And then later on, when I want to use the GPS function, I think to myself, why isn't this working? So a lot of it is that your students might not have given permission to iClicker to know their location, and it may just be as simple as something like that. But you can also suspend it in the moment to let students check in as well. So when we're looking at iClicker attendance, here are a couple of best practices and things related to how you set up your course that we've found instructors have really good success with time after time. So number one is let your students know why you're taking attendance, because when we don't tell our students what our motives are, they assume what our motives are. And so a lot of them will think, oh, they're using this app to have me take attendance because they don't want to get to know me. Or this is just one more example of the bureaucracy of modern education. Or, you know, they might not even be thinking about your motive. They're just saying, oh, this person's taking attendance for whatever reason. It doesn't have anything to do with me. So I really like how Mike talks about how, you know, if your butt is not in that seat, how in the world can you be participating? How in the world are you getting the full classroom experience? I need to know that you're there because it lets me know what you're experiencing. So letting the students know why you take attendance, it sounds really silly. It sounds really self-evident, but for our students, it might not be. And so explaining why you take attendance is a really good way to help students embrace this tool. I also really like to talk about how iClicker Reef helps them self-manage. You know, we have all kinds of different students. Sometimes we have these students who are very, very helpless, for lack of a better word, that, you know, they're always coming up to the podium, usually at that moment where you really needed those 5 minutes, to say, hey, how many classes have I missed? Or, you know, was I late on Tuesday? Or, you know, how many more classes can I miss? I want to go to my cousin's wedding. And so that, you know, Mike, you were saying that you're not even getting those questions anymore now that you've turned over to the attendance setting.
That's correct. I don't have students asking me what their attendance looks like because they're able to monitor on their own.
Yeah, and then there's a whole cohort of our students who are terrified of us. as friendly and as open, and I know, Mike, you are always telling your students there are no dumb questions, please come and talk to me, but there are going to be students who never, ever, ever want to say anything to us. And so you might have a student who thinks to themselves, well, my grandfather's having surgery on Friday and I'd like to be there, but I don't know how much of this class that I've missed. Therefore, I'm just not going to do this other thing because I'm afraid. And so if they've got that app, they can actually look at it. The image that Mike had on his last slide was actually a screenshot from the student app, and these students get a little calendar that shows them every class meeting, every attendance session that's been run, and it shows them whether or not they were in class, or if they were late, or if they were absent, or if they had an excused absence. So that self-management thing, I think, is so huge, and it's something we're constantly trying to get our students to do. And we want to let them know explicitly what they need to do to get set up for your course. You know, I really like Mike's approach, how he's saying, our students are trying, let's help them, you know, let's meet them, let's meet in the middle. Our students really do want to get set up correctly, and they might even have a lot of anxiety about that. So one of the things is in the support community that we've set up at iClicker, we have a lot of articles that are specifically for students that you as an instructor can pass along to your students and say, hey, listen, here's this article that's just how to set up your iClicker Reef account. Go through these 4 steps, and at the end of it, you're going to be ready for class. And what's great is if you're turning to a support article on our site, it's going to be the most up-to-date information that they can possibly get. These are articles that Em and I update, you know, weekly. We might touch the same article every single week to make changes as the product changes. And so that's something you don't have to monitor, but it does help your students to get set up and gives them the tools that they need to succeed. And let them know what they should do if they are present, but for whatever reason, like Mike was talking, they can't check in. You know, they drop the phone in the toilet, or, you know, they're using an iPhone 3 and it's not supported anymore and they're having troubles with it. Just let them know, hey, if you're here, come to me. One of the things that I always say is you need to let me know that day that there was an issue. You can't come back a month later and go, I swear I was there that entire week. You need to let me know in that day that there was an issue, or whatever it is that your policy is. You also want to set up attendance before your students add your course. We're doing pretty good on time, so I'm just going to click on this link. This is taking me over to instructor.reef-education.com. Yes, we do call it iClicker Cloud now, but this is a kind of a legacy website that we have here. You can always just go to iClicker.com and click that login and click instructor, and this will take you to the same place. So if you only want to remember one web address, iClicker.com is also a good place to use as a portal. So when you go into your class, you want to go ahead and you want to click on it, and then you want to come down to your settings. And here in your settings, you can click on attendance. Now, if you click attendance only here, Mike was talking earlier about the fact that if you're an attendance only class, it's going to be free. And so by clicking this attendance only button, one of the things that it's going to help for with your students is as long as this is the only iClicker class that they're attending, they're not going to get a prompt to buy a subscription. So attendance only is free for now into, we don't have a time yet on when we might sunset free access to this. So this is a really nice way to start using iClicker. And it is something that makes attendance a lot easier for you and your students. I would never want a student to pay to make it so that I have a bureaucratic task that's easier for me. Like, I can see how that would leave a bad taste in a student's mouth. So by leaving it on attendance only here, they're not going to get prompted to put in a payment. And so that's something really helpful. In these course details too, here you can also put in down at the bottom your meeting times. And so this is what you need to put in if you want to get those really cool push notifications that Mike was talking about earlier. So if I put these in, and my class meets Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 a.m. One time I taught a 7 a.m. class. I don't recommend that. That was really tough. But if it's at 8 o'clock in the morning, I know that students at 7:45 are going to get a little push notification that comes up at the top of their phone that says, hey, get ready for class. Cloud 101 is starting at 8 a.m. And it's that kind of thing where, they're talking with a friend on the quad and they're having a good time. And all of a sudden they go, oh, I got to go to class. I'll see you in a minute. And it just helps them to be more on time. And again, it's one of those things that helps them to self-manage. So putting these days and times in here is really, really helpful. And then it also makes it so that when you click the attendance tab over here, you're going to be able to set it to auto run. And I love that Mike sets it to auto run because when we have the best intentions in the world, if you're doing polling and you're doing attendance as well, where you think to yourself, I'm going to ask polling questions every single class period. And the best laid plans of mice and men is one of those things that I always think about, because then you have that day, I had days where I walked into the classroom and there would be an earthquake. I'm in California, and 15 minutes in, we would have an earthquake, and that would kind of disrupt our day and maybe put me off my game, and we'd have to go out of the classroom for a few minutes. And then if I'm manually running every one of my attendance sessions and I'm distracted and things are happening in my classroom, then I might miss that day of attendance. And then it's not going to show up in my students' accounts. It's not going to show up in my CSV file when I download it later to manipulate it. So by simply setting it to auto run, I can make sure that even if there's a wild adventure in my class that's super wonderful, I'm going to be able to go ahead and have that data that I want so bad. So if I had a 7 a.m. class, I would set it up for 7:55. And one of the things that we're seeing with instructors who are using attendance and who are using iClicker Cloud consistently is they're showing up to their class, keys in hand, coffee in hand, waiting to open up the class, and there's that familiar line of students on either side, and the students are all staring at their phone, but what they're doing is they are looking at the iClicker Cloud app, the iClicker Reef app, and they're actually going through their data. They might be in there studying some of the slides that you asked last time because they're thinking maybe there's going to be a quiz. Or you set attendance to auto run, and so they're already checking into your class even as you're opening up the door. And yes, this makes things easier for you, but also let's think about what's happening in the brain. In our students' brains, they are actually accessing old moments in class. So, when we ask those polling questions in class, we're creating this emotional moment where our student is challenged with a question. They try and come up with the right answer. Maybe there's a discussion. Maybe there's a think, parent, share. It takes a few minutes to find out what the actual correct answer was. And for our students to then, the next time they come to class, stand in the hallway and review those slide questions, they're actually thinking back to moments from class, which I think that's one of our whole goals. Is we're saying coming to class is really, really valuable. You're going to get these great things out of it. And we're giving them touchstones to come back to those emotional moments that we created in class. So yes, definitely set it to auto run, because it creates, it habituates attendance, and it also makes it so that our students just get back into that mode of learning and back into that mode of our class much, much faster than if you're sort of creating everything from scratch every single time that you meet with them. Here's where you can set location. If you don't want to set location for attendance, that's perfectly fine, and you can click Save here. So for some instructors, what they do is maybe they set up attendance in the first 2 weeks of class. They'll also have the paper sign-in sheet just to accommodate for students coming and going. And what they'll say is, in 2 weeks, I'm going to start requiring location. So right now is kind of practice time, but in 2 weeks, you're going to come in and it's going to verify your location. And letting students know that and kind of easing in is a good idea as well. So when you click that require and set for attendance, you can search for a location really quickly. So I'm going to look for Pasadena City College, one of my alma maters. And then what you can do is you can click on your institution, and then what you can do is you can zoom in and zoom in. I'm thinking of that old enhance joke from CSI that we had. And you can get really close into that map, and you can take your little blue dot, and let's say that you are your lab 124 right here. You can put your dot here, and then you can change your radius based on how big you want it to be. And my advice is to, that first time that you run GPS, I always like to set it nice and big and put it at 500, especially if I've never taught in that classroom building before. And that's because I don't know what that building is going to be like. I don't know, maybe I'm in a basement with cinder block walls and it's a huge, huge, huge building, and I just don't really know how GPS is going to work. And then as the weeks go by, I'll just bring it down and bring it down again, until I get to a place where, students are not saying, waving in the back and saying, I can't check in, I can't check in. And so I try and get it down to as small as is reasonable. And a good way to think about this is if you've ever used a ride-sharing app like Uber or Lyft, and you go out of the restaurant and you're ready to be picked up, and the app thinks it knows where you are with GPS, and it sets your PIN, it's not a huge distance away, but maybe it takes you 6 addresses up, and it says you are here. It's one of those limits of GPS that we're really working as hard as we can to accommodate, but it's also just kind of the beast that is this technology. So when you think about trying to get your ride share to know where you are using the GPS in your phone, you know that it's not perfect. And the same thing is going to happen with your students. So having some sort of flexibility and forgiveness around this thing is a really good idea, especially in the beginning, because your students want to automate this process as well. So when you're happy with your settings, you can press save. And so I've got it set to auto run. It's going to come on a lot, but let's say that I'm, in class, and let's say there was an earthquake and we all had to evacuate for 20 minutes and then we came back, and I want to take attendance again to see if I lost anybody. I can hit that start button, and when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start my class session, and I'm running a new attendance session. And I can see who's not checked in, and I can see who is checked in. And let's say that Natalie Dougal is standing right in front of me, and she goes, I don't know what's going on, but I can't check in. One of the things that I can do is I can just go and I can turn location off, and I can go, okay, check in right now. And then that student checks in, and then I turn it back on. And that way I know I've accommodated that one student who's physically right in front of me, who I know is not having a problem, but I've kept location on for the rest of the class. And so I find that to be a really neat little trick. And then I can just go ahead and end class. It's always going to ask me to confirm that, because again, every time we do this, we're creating data. We're creating a record of what's going on in our class, and we want that to be accurate. So then we can go ahead and click end session. So I find this very intuitive. All of this lives online as well. So let's say that you're somebody who you're not sure about in-class polling, but you are interested in attendance, you can do this completely online from the web for free. And you don't even have to put any special software on your computer that you're using when you teach your class. So if this is something that you're more interested in, we have a lot of support articles, but also we're always happy to talk with you. You can just go to iClicker.com and sign up for a training. So setting up attendance before your students add your iClicker course, again, makes it so that you have a record to refer to. So I like how Mike is doing the belts and suspenders, because on one hand, he's got a paper record, but he's also still running those attendance sessions so that he can go into iClicker and say, okay, John Smith doesn't have his iClicker set up yet, but he signed in here, so I'm just going to go and put that in his attendance record. And in that way, again, we're helping our students self-manage, and we're keeping all of our records in one place. You can also always set up a practice course for yourself first if you just want to play. For instructors, none of this costs anything. You can set up as many classes as you want. And then I think the other thing to remember too is iClicker is an all-you-can-eat affair for our students. So if you have a student who's in your class and they're paying for an iClicker subscription for their bio class, and you know, you're teaching nutrition, you can also use iClicker, and it's going to cost the same for that student. So that's something that's really good about getting together with your colleagues and saying, hey, can we all unite around one polling system, simply because, you know, if they're using iClicker in one class and they're using iClicker Cloud, that's $15. If they end up using it in 5 classes, that's going to be $3 per class for that student. And so they're getting a ton of value out of it, and instructors have a lot of flexibility in how they use it. You know, when you think about GPS, you want to be thinking whether or not you want to do it. I think the pros of it are it's really easy to use, but it's difficult to deceive. I'm not going to say it's impossible to deceive, because human beings like to cheat. There's about 2% of the human population that if there's a rule that's presented to them, they're going to see how to get around it. You just have to see how much people cheat to get fast passes at Disneyland to see how, yeah, people are going to try and game a system. You know, I used to proctor SAT exams, and I remember catching a student who had printed out formulas and put it inside of a water bottle label. And the only reason that they were caught is they were really interested in their water bottle. So yes, there are ways to deceive GPS. They are complicated. They are a heavy lift. They're not something that a student is going to want to do. You know, if Mike has them meeting 3 times a week for 15 weeks. That's 45 class sessions. You know, that's a lot of effort to put into deceiving a GPS. And then there are also unique applications with GPS that I'll talk about in a minute. But you also want to think there are some downsides. The physical limitation of your building. If you are in certain buildings, GPS is not going to be as easy an option for you to opt into. Also, you know, he was talking about how he had a student who was having trouble checking in. And for him, this is something that's a teachable moment, and he rolls with it. For other instructors who plan their lectures down to the minute, they really don't want that disruption. And so knowing that GPS can, you know, cause a little pause at points in your class, you might choose not to do that. And then lastly, you might have students who have privacy objections to GPS, or they might have privacy objections to you using it for attendance. One of the things that's always nice to tell your students is iClicker is not tracking you. iClicker is not seeing, oh, they went to the cafeteria afterwards and then they went to Starbucks, and, you know, we're not looking into that at all. It's an opt-in affair that's happening only in that moment in class when they check in. And so talking to them directly about those privacy objections can often overcome some objections and make the student feel better about the tool that's being used. So some creative uses of attendance that I've seen that I think are really great is, number one, group work. You know, students hem and haw and complain about having to work in groups. And I always say to them, guess what, you know, you're going to do after college? You're going to work in groups. It's called work. You're going to work with a lot of people that you might not have chosen to work with, but you're going to work with them. So this is how you flex that muscle. So if you have your students and you say, hey, on Thursday, instead of meeting in class, I want your groups to meet in the library, you can set up an attendance event and put the blue dot in the middle of the library and say, hey, when you're there, check in. That's how I know that you went to the library and you met with your group. And so if you see that your group of 4, 3 students checked in and 1 didn't, you can kind of start to think, oh, okay, maybe there's a group dynamic there that needs addressing. Or, you know, if you had them do that 4 times and 1 individual never ever came to any of the group sessions, that's going to help you understand how your students split up the work. Another way that you might want to use attendance with GPS would be if you have labs with TAs where you're not physically present. Maybe there's a whole different grading scheme that goes on over there, but you want to know whether or not your students are attending their labs. You can require them to check in with iClicker attendance, and then you have access and understanding of that attendance sheet. And we also now have multiple roles in iClicker, so it's the kind of thing where you could set up the course, you could set up the attendance, and then you can give your TA a role in that class as a teaching assistant. And then they, when they're running that lab, if they have a student who says, hey, I flushed my phone down the toilet, the TA can log into iClicker, log right into your course, and change that attendance record for the student. There may also be special orientations on campus that you want to encourage students to attend. Again, you can set the GPS to that time and place, and you can say, hey, I'll know that you went to the lab orientation if you check in at this time. Likewise, you could do that with special events on campus. You can say, hey, there's going to be a speaker on Saturday night. There's going to be free wine and cheese. Go, go. If you go and you check in, I'll give you 5 extra points. And that's a really great way to do all kinds of different extra credit. So you might say, hey, on Thursday, I'm not having any classes, but I want you to come by my office hours. And so one of the things you can do is you can say, show up at my office hours, check in with attendance. Let's have a 5-minute chat. If I see you checked in, I'm going to give you 3 extra points. Because, we are dying for students to come to our class, and they're dying for them to come to our office hours, but students don't always really understand how sincere we are about that offer. And so making it into an extra credit event, making it into something where they check in with their phone, it just really encourages the student to participate in a new way and to take advantage of that thing that's in their hand all the time and to turn it into a teaching device. So I think we're to our questions and comments. Mike, are you there?
I'm here.
All right.
And I absolutely agree. What we're doing is getting students to leverage this technology. We often will fight with students about, are you using it properly? This is a way for them to use it properly. They can check in at different events. They don't even have to be on campus. If there's a speaker that's going to be in your town and you want them to attend, you can describe a radius around that location. You can set a time and you can see if they were actually there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our students are going to have their phones at work. Their bosses are not going to come up to them and say, hey, put your phone away. You absolutely can't have your phone out at work. They need to learn how to manage this device and do it in a way, like you said, Mike, with professionalism. Mike, have you had any students, complain, grouts about, oh, he wants to use this thing?
No, I've had a few students early in a semester saying that money was short, and I remind them that the first 14 days are free. And I guess in theory, I could have them just do attendance, but I use it for polls as well. So there are ways to work with them. But I've never had a student say, I don't want to use this application. I find it too intrusive or anything like that. No.
Awesome. Okay, so I do have a couple come in. How do you set up attendance for one event? And Natalie, you might want to take that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
You treat it like a test class. I have a class that I leave open that I call Sandbox when I'm playing with stuff. But you can create an event, you create a class that just for that one event.
Absolutely. And that's definitely a way that I would recommend doing it. Again, as an instructor, you can create as many courses as you want. So, I could have my main course, and then I could say, okay, here's English 101, and then you can also join this course called English 101 Extra Credit. And in English 101 Extra Credit, I might say, hey, if you, there's going to be a movie that's on, the invention of the typewriter. I don't know. I wouldn't make my students do that, but I'm just, but I might say if you go to that movie and you check in with attendance, I'm going to see that in the extra credit class. The other thing that you could do is, let's say that you want your students to come to an event and you're at the event. You could just go in and you could turn attendance on. You can go into settings, click on attendance, and then go and you can change the location. Let's say that I wanted them to go to the Theater Royal on Drury Lane, and I want them to go here, and I want them to go to the Royal Opera House. I can go, and I can click on it, and I can set my little GPS there, and I can save it. And then instead of auto-running, I would simply start class when that event is happening, and then let students check into that location. if I want to. And again, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say one of the things that they added to the software was the ability to archive old classes. So if you create this special event, but you then don't want to see it every time you log in, you can push it into an archive folder so that it's not there with your current classes. Yes,
and you could even go into settings. You can go into course details, and right here, I could say that the start date is, if I was setting up today as an extra credit event, I might make the start date February 12th, so my students could find it the day before. And then on February, 14th, I can say that the class ends. And not only will this make it so that it automatically disappears if they're looking for, say, my last name for a course, but it'll make it so that no one can join it after the fact and say, oh, no, I was really there and it just didn't log me in. And students who have added this course will still have access to whatever happened in that session on that day. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can use this feature to sort of make it so that your students are being guided in the right direction. And again,
see the legend in the yellow at the top.
Right here.
Because of the end date, it's going to automatically be archived. It will be out of your roster. You can still get back to it, but it will not be there with your currently active classes.
Yes, it won't be in your active classes. And so let's say that I teach a class for a semester and then the end date passes and I'm teaching the class, a week later. A student can't go and add that class later and look at my old slides. And then, so it makes it so that things are just kept more private as well, so that students can't take an unfair advantage.
Yeah. We have just a minute or so left since we started a minute or two late. We have one more question. So Mike said he shuts off attendance after 15 minutes or so. If that is the case, and if you are doing polling questions, are people who are not in the classroom still able to answer those polling questions?
Because I use geolocation, they have to physically be within the prescribed radius in order to answer the questions.
Yeah, if you're really concerned about a student, say, logging in from their dorm room, and let's say that even they're in the GPS location. One of the things that you can do is you can go into settings, and then you can go over here to polling, and you can make changes to when students can see screenshots. So I can make it so that my students only get a shot sent to their device after I've ended the polling session. So this is the kind of thing where if you're worried that students are going to come and they're going to join a session when they're not really there, this makes it so that, if you're asking them a short answer question, they're not going to know what the heck you're answering. And so they're either not going to answer, they're going to give you a nonsense answer. And this is something that you can change as the term goes along. So maybe in the first 2 weeks, you don't share pictures of your screen with students until after polling is over. This makes it so students can study those screenshots. And then, maybe 2 weeks in and things have settled down and you kind of know who your class is again, you can go and you can say, okay, now you guys can all get screenshots again because I'm not concerned that students are cheating in that way. So these are really manipulatable throughout the term, and they're really made to work with you and not against you. And again, I love what Mike was saying. We take all of our development ideals from instructors in the classroom. We don't meet in a boardroom and go, what do we think instructors might want? Instead, we go directly to instructors and we say, hey, what is it that you want? How can we improve this product? And that's why we love our beta testers and we love our faculty advocates, because they're telling us how to develop the product correctly, and it's not coming from a bunch of people who don't have classroom experience.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Started from faculty members, and it continues to be that way.
Yeah.
One of the beauties of the software is the students can have the images of whatever you had on the screen, the questions, and they can use them to study later on for exams, for a final. So that's one of the reasons I adopted iClicker.
Yeah, and now we actually even have a tool called Study Tools where students can take your polling screenshots and they can turn them into a flashcard pack or a practice test that they can use right from within the app or from the iClicker website. And students love it because, again, they just get to obsess over those questions you've been asking. And I love it because their brain is actually remembering class moment. Which, that's the holy grail to me. I don't know about you, Mike, but if they remember what happened in class, I'm a happy camper.
It's all about learning.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We are at time, and we haven't had any other questions come in, so I think we're in good shape to close it out for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, especially Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's always amazing to hear how people are using this out in the wild, and especially for us who are here at iClicker, it's always awesome. And Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise as well. Again, we'll be following up with the recording for this webinar, and if you have any other questions that have come up in the meantime, feel free to reply directly to that email and we will get you the answers that you need. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.